What was the single biggest mistake in all of history? In the beginning the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. Douglas Adams. Thanks, Obama.
Let me be clear.
Let there be let theory be light. Biden, take this one for me. Whoever rejected Hitler's art school application. I'm sorry, Adolf, but your drawing of straight lines and right angles just isn't good enough. I'll give you right angles. What do you bet the dean of the art school was Jewish? 6 million euros. Hey, this wooden horse gif seems legit. This is almost shockingly embarrassing to ask, but did the Trojan War actually happen? I thought it was a myth, or at least mostly myth. Assuming the German forces would take Moscow before the onset of winter in 1941. Invading Russia. Thinking it will go well. They never learn. Unless you are the Mongols. The funniest part of the whole thing is that Hitler was great admirer of and studied Napoleon, and so he knew that attacking Russia in the winter was a bad idea, and yet he still went and did it anyway. Anything Napoleon can do I can do better. Hey guys, you know what we should do? What? Invade Russia right before the winter. Genius. Wow. How did we not think of that? A couple months later. Hey guys, do you have any extra food? No. Maybe not the biggest, but the Spanish Armada and Philip II's reign in general. He was handed over half of Europe by his father and had the largest overseas empire in the world. Spain was wealthier and nearly more powerful than all of Europe combined. If Philip played his cards correctly, Spain could have ended up ruling all of Europe. You're welcome, Europe. Sincerely, England. You're welcome, Europe. Sincerely, the North Sea. Fixed that for you. You're welcome, Europe. Sincerely, the Aztecs who cursed the Spaniards. Fixed that for you. NASA taped over the moon landing. There are no known original media recordings of the event because they used a proprietary format and needed to reuse tapes down through the years. No matter how badly you duck up something at work, you can always feel good that at least you didn't tape over the moon landing. Can someone tell me if this guy is for real? This is real and very sad on NASA's part. There was probably some mistake made millions of years ago that had crazy consequences, and we're all just sitting here making fun of Hitler. Like if Ugworld just accepted the tribe's decision and life mated again instead of mating Oregon grew, we'd all have world peace by now and also jetpacks. But instead of jetpacks, Ugg went on to make boots. Electing Obama. Just kidding. But honestly, the genocide of the Native Americans was pretty lame. Pretty lame. Hey Pablo, come on man. Don't kill them. Hey come on dude, just stop it, okay? It's pretty lame, you know. You're a douche, Pablo. I think the biggest mistake is letting Stalin's horror fall to the back burner compared to Hitler's. One of the better examples of history is written by the victors. There's also the Hitler. Yeah, he was bad. What about the Japanese atrocities in China thing? History is written by people who care. And for most Westerners, East Europe and all of Asia might as well be labeled here be dragons. Which is okay, because the Chinese had cool dragons. Sir, these colonists want something called taxation with representation. They're requesting we give them a say in parliament as they represent a vast population of predominantly original English natives. King, well do them. At the time the king had little real power over day-to-day politics. The people who didn't want to give the colonists representation, there were plans, were the politicians in parliament, who wanted to assert their right to do whatever they wanted. The king was briefly suggested as a mediator for the dispute. However, then things got out of hand, and he got involved in the loyalist side. It's always disappointing when politicians make stupid decisions with far-reaching consequences simply because they don't want to look weak or be seen to compromise. I'm so glad we don't have those kind of problems, Todd. When any country invades Afghanistan, I went like 15 turns with only one soldier in it. Bloody Afghans. That's a risk. Ending the space program, specifically the Apollo program. The reason we have made advances in computer technology in the past 50 or so years was because of the research NASA scientists did to build a spaceship to travel across space and land a human being on the moon. It's because of NASA that we have things like satellites, personal computers and smartphones. Had we have stayed on the moon, we would be way ahead of where we are at now technologically. We definitely would have figured out fusion by experimenting with the large amounts of helium-3 up there. Space travel would have advanced faster, as the trial and error processes involved with researching ships would have enabled more efficient spaceships, and we may have even traveled to Mars by now. That is just the tip of the iceberg of what the research we could have done to get us to stay on the moon could have given us. Perhaps some of the atrocities committed between the ending of the Apollo program and now could have been avoided. They would at least be different. The Cold War could have turned out differently had the planned joint Russian and American space travel efforts in the 1960s been approved. Hell, the war in the Middle East could have played out differently. However, I must admit that is a stretch. I bought Windows Vista for full price at launch. This is hands down the saddest thing in this thread. This doesn't exactly count for all of history, but I think America's biggest mistake was not listening to George Washington when he warned us not to form political parties. Russia selling Alaska for $7.2 million, 2 cents an acre. Can you imagine how much more fun the Cold War would have been if Alaska was still a part of Russia? Canada might disagree with that. The Dutch discovering Australia about 100 years before it was settled by the British, but never acting on it. They could now have a landmass 100s of times larger than their own. Read what the Dutch wrote about Australia. They basically called it a hellhole nobody in their right mind would want. And boy, were they ever right. Hey man, Australians have feelings too.
When the Fire Nation attacked.
The Ottoman Empire's choice to join World War I. I once paid 25 euros for 2 Domino's pizzas. I could have gotten 2 pizzas for half that price if I had gone to my local takeaway. That was a costly mistake. Never again. We all remember that day. In the 14th century, the Ming Empire of China has the potential with their navigator Zheng He, who was able to establish a trade presence in the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. If China had become a maritime power, it is inconceivable that Western Europe would have been able to be as dominant over the rest of the world as it became. Imagine the Chinese discovering America a century before Columbus. Instead, the Mings abandoned the project and turned towards massive isolationism. But right now it looks like China will come back and dominate the world anyway, so I guess it was only a half millennium delay. The Chernobyl meltdown. Such a huge duck up. Such irreversible ramifications. I agree, especially because the Chernobyl incident was a veritable clusterfuck of poor design and shitty implementation. Not only did they make some questionable design choices, for example, containment was an aluminium roof, for duck's sake, they also ran tests with safety features turned off, on purpose, with people who had no idea what they were doing behind the wheel. Well, panel, but whatever. I'd also like to point out that Fukushima Daiichi could have been easily prevented if TEPCO didn't copy pasta a Midwest plant design onto a coastal site. I'm amazed no one has mentioned the Crusades. There were some very poorly organized expeditions indeed. How about the Fourth Crusade? Crusaders besieged those they were intended to protect, create rift between the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches that lasts over 800 years. The trilogy was okay, but they really killed it with all the sequels. This is by far the biggest mistake in history, bar none. Sadly, I'm too late to the thread and this will be buried. In 1995 there was a high-altitude scientific rocket experiment launched from Norway. The Norwegians had notified the Russians of the launch, but the information was never passed along to the proper people within the Russian military/government. The Russian early warning radars detected the launch and identified it as a potential attack. The whole military was immediately put on high alert. President Boris Yeltsin was given the nuclear suitcase and, according to Russian protocol, had 10 minutes to decide whether to fire their nuclear missiles. That was the estimated time it would take for a US missile to land in Russia. As the Russians monitored the rocket, they noticed that it reached a maximum altitude of 1453 kilometers, exactly mimicking the expected altitude of a Trident missile. The Russians knew the US kept many Trident-armed submarines in the Norwegian Sea, so these facts seemed to confirm the attack. To make matters worse, the rocket was a multi-stage rocket and separated from its booster rockets in flight. To the Russian radar system, the rocket's separation into multiple parts looked exactly like a MIRV, multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle, payload. Under these circumstances, according to Russian policy, President Yeltsin is supposed to launch a retaliation attack. Yeltsin activated the nuclear keys for the first time ever. This caused all Russian nuclear submarines to go into a combat readiness state and prepare for nuclear retaliation. With his thumb over the launch button, and knowing full well the standing policy was for him to launch, he made a mistake, at least according to policy, and decided not to launch. TLDR, everyone is alive today because of this mistake. 1 ply.